So welcome to the 2019 VuFind Summit at Villanova, but mostly on the internet. I know a lot of you were at the German Summit last month and saw me give essentially the same talk that I'm about to give. So to you, I apologize. I'm going to try to strike a balance between getting through material quickly and filling the next hour with something interesting. We will see how I do. So I will start with a couple of thank yous. First of all, thank you to Agilent Technologies, which has been providing financial support to these events for the past several years, and they did so again this year. And also thanks to the communications team here at Valvey for helping with logistics and photography and so forth. Your assistance is greatly appreciated. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Callie, who is not in this room. So as always, I like to start the summit by talking about what has happened over the past year. And quite a few things have happened. We've had one minor and one major release and a couple of bug fixes. So we got the VuFind 5 thread up to 5.1.1, and now our very latest release is 6.0.1. Across these releases, we made a few changes and improvements. We now require at least PHP 7.1 since earlier versions of PHP have gone out of support. We now support MySQL 8, though you still have to use some legacy settings because MySQL 8 compatibility is challenging. I think most people are probably going to stick with MySQL 5 for a while, but we at least have the bare minimum of support should you be forced to upgrade to MySQL 8. We have a few new and improved features. We've revamped the user interface for managing applied filters to make it visible in more places and a little bit more consistent. We got rid of the retain current filters checkbox, which I think has been one of the most confusing user interface elements in VuFind through all time. There's still, I think, some further improvements we can make as we move into VuFind 7, but we've at least made some good progress there. We've added email verification support, so users can receive emails and confirm that their emails are valid if you wish to confirm that in your instance. That's, of course, optional. We've added integration with the Overdrive ebook platform, which is particularly useful to some public libraries. And we've added some better user notifications of account status things like overdues and fines and so forth. Again, that's an area that will be able to be further improved in the future, but we at least have the basic mechanisms in place now. As far as what's coming next, there are a few significant things in the pipeline. VuFind 6.1 will probably be coming out pretty early next year. The main new feature in there is going to be selective dissemination of information, or in other words, email notifications when new search results appear in saved searches. This again will be an optional feature that can be turned on, but this is something that a number of people have asked for and a number of people have implemented locally, and so I'm looking to provide a default implementation in the core code to hopefully reduce everybody's maintenance burden and get us to a more common set of functionality. Additionally, there have been quite a few improvements around authentication and permission, just in terms of offering new options, authenticating through email, creating global passwords for the whole site, controlling access on a controller by controller basis without having to modify code. All just giving a little bit more flexibility to how VuFind is exposed to your users. Then, once 6.1 is finished, we will move on to another major release of VuFind 7. Some of the things planned there are an upgrade to Solar 8, since we haven't gotten up to date on Solar in a while. Support for a more modular VuFind that makes it easier to plug in pieces to and share components. This may involve some refactoring of the core and the addition of some new features for better leveraging native Zen framework functionality. This is something that was discussed in some detail at the German summit, and anyone who missed that, I will be happy to fill you in. Just catch me when you can. It also may be time to make some changes to our themes. We've been on Bootstrap 3 for quite a while, and there's been a lot of discussion in the community about what comes next. And so Chris is going to be leading the effort to figure out what that should look like. There's already some experimental work in progress to test some concepts in that area. Finally, as many of you already know, Zen Framework, which has been the backbone of VuFind for quite a few years now, is transitioning to the new name of Laminas due to some restructuring of organizations and companies. We're not yet sure exactly what the impact of that is going to be, but at very least, we're going to have to update a ton of documentation and change namespace definitions in every single file of the project. So that's going to be some degree of headache in the not too distant future. Also, outside of actually working on the code, we are working on transitioning to becoming part of the Open Library Foundation, which I will talk about a little further soon, and also just working on community building. I'm very glad that everyone who is here, but it's a lot of familiar faces and a lot of people with a lot of experience in VuFind. And I think it's time to make an effort to reach out to new people as well and make sure that what we're doing is as accessible as possible to the users who might benefit from the software. So I'd like to put a little effort into that, especially since I think the software itself has become increasingly stable over the years. There aren't as many feature requests as there used to be. So talking about the Open Library Foundation, this is not yet fully official. We still have to get some legal paperwork sorted out, but it seems fairly likely to occur within the coming year. Essentially, for the last more than 10 years, VuFind has been hosted by a single institution here at Villanova. And while Villanova has been a great host and will continue to contribute to the project in the coming years, just for the sake of sustainability, I think tying a project that is used by so many people to one institution has some risks. And so we've been trying to figure out a way to get it into more neutral territory so that Villanova can continue to be involved, but isn't necessarily the sole linchpin of the project infrastructure. This will enable people to contribute to help run the project and for potentially a change of leadership in the future. Again, I'm not anticipating that to happen, but you know, change is inevitable over time, and I want to be ready in case circumstances change in the future. So in addition to these sort of administrative benefits, the Open Library Foundation also gets us into a closer relationship with other OLF. Thank you. We had some feedback issues there.
Are you going through slides? Because they're not updated.
Oh, yes, I am going through slides. Sorry, everyone. Chris has alerted me that my slides aren't actually updating. All right, so we now resume my speech already in progress. So what I was saying was that joining the OLF gets us in close proximity with other projects that have common interests with VuFind and that can potentially interact with it, like the new Folio integrated library system or library services platform, as the new cool terminology goes, GoKB, the knowledge base, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things that the OLF is starting to do is hold annual Wolfcon conferences for their member projects. I think there's a possibility, given the diminishing attendance of this event, that it may make sense to shift future VuFind planning over to Wolfcon, where we hopefully will still be able to bring in the usual people, but may also be able to bring in interested parties from other adjacent projects and do some more collaboration work. Another benefit of Wolfcon is that it is not going to be a strictly US-based event. I think at least one is being planned for Germany within a couple of years. So with VuFind's international community, moving the conference back and forth offers more opportunities for in-person collaboration, and hopefully that will work well for us. So again, the announcement is not officially out yet, but I want to be sure everyone is aware that it is probably coming. And if there are any concerns about this, do let me know, but I think it will be for the best for everyone. So moving on to community building. As I say, there are several areas here where I think we could do better. I would really like to be more accessible to new users. I feel that particularly recently, I found myself answering some of the same questions over and over again on the mailing lists, which is probably a sign that we're not communicating as well as we could with our documentation. I think we're in pretty good shape in the sense that our documentation covers all the things that it needs to cover, but that doesn't mean that people can find those things easily or understand what they're reading. Because in some cases it's a bit terse and more note to self than welcoming tutorial. I think it would be really great to have sort of a structured sequence of articles to bring someone into VuFind in a more friendly way. I would sure love to have a VuFind book, and there is one now, but it's written in Portuguese. I'd love to have one that's accessible to a broader market than that. I'd also love to have training sessions if there's actually interest, so that people could spend a few hours in a classroom and get sort of the basic walkthrough of how VuFind is put together and how to modify it. But all of these things require time and effort, and mine is stretched very, very thin. So I'm hoping that these are some areas where perhaps some of the community can assist. And also, I don't want to do these things if they're not actually going to be helpful. So I'm also interested in trying to get feedback from people who want something, to make sure that we're giving them what they want. Also, it would be great if within the community we could do a better job of distributing work. Again, I'm very happy to work on this project and I enjoy it very much, but I am increasingly spread thin, and I don't want to be the single point of failure for the project. I certainly do have great support from a number of people who are in this room or on this call, and so I don't mean to in any way diminish what you're providing in terms of help and support. I'm just saying more is always helpful if we can find a way to accomplish that. I've also noticed that the biweekly developer calls have become, for the most part, less active and less productive over the past year. Attendance has been lower, and more than ever, it's been me reciting Jira ticket lists, which I don't think anyone really enjoys. So I'm hoping that we can find a way to make those more useful for everyone and perhaps engage more people. And I know one part of that is that Chris is hoping to do some videos on there. You know, maybe we can combine a couple of these bullet points, utilize the developer call hour to create some of the documentation and training material that we need. And then we'll have some reusable materials that we can use to help people with. I just saw the chat light blink. I don't know if that was. Oh, well, thank you. So in any case, that's kind of the state of the VuFind speech. And it only took 15 minutes, and I'm supposed to fill 45 more before we take a break and then get to road mapping. So if anyone has conversation topics, start thinking about them now. But first, I just want to say a little bit more about the road mapping we are going to do later today. You know, things I'm hoping that you'll all think about include features that your institutions need that perhaps the community can help you get to. Anything that you've already done locally that might be worth sharing, that you're willing to take the time to contribute. in terms of my community babbling, needs in terms of tutorials, documentation, training, and even if you are a VuFind veteran, if there is something you find unclear or confusing that you'd like better explained or documented, feel free to put me on the spot and make me justify my decisions or the decisions of others that I accepted into the project. Again, also what you want out of the developers calls. Are they a waste of your time or not? Could they be more valuable? And of course, how you can help, because we can always use a little more assistance in all kinds of things. And again, I'm grateful for all the help I'm already receiving. I feel like I'm a public television pledge drive right now, but we can always use more help. And I see some big projects coming down the pipeline over here that are inevitably going to consume a lot of my time. I just don't want VuFind to suffer because I'm extra busy for a couple of years. So that's really all I have to offer there. So when we get to the road mapping, it's going to be pretty freeform this year. Chris has put together a very high-level summary Google document, which you'll see the link to on this slide. And maybe Chris can also paste that link into the chat so that it's easier to access. We're kind of hoping to use Jira as our tool for road mapping this year. We've already tagged a handful of tickets with a Roadmap 2019 tag so that we can group them together. The idea is that during this session, anyone can feel free to search Jira or add Jira tickets and tag them with that tag so that they're under consideration. We also would love it if you look at the tagged tickets and vote on the ones that you think are important. That way we can prioritize work based on what gets the most votes. And of course, we can also use Jira's commenting system to discuss the individual issues and then have a record of that conversation. So what I'm hoping to do when we get to the road mapping portion of the day is kind of take things one at a time, bring them up on the screen, discuss them with the group. And if there is a lot of controversy and need for deeper discussion, we'll table some things. We can break off into smaller groups to discuss things in more detail if there's a need for that. And if we're all happy, we can just move forward, just so that we have time to talk about each individual issue a little bit. And then hopefully at the end of that, we will somehow magically have a plan for the next year of development. Maybe I haven't thought this through enough, but it always seems to work, so I'm hoping it will work once again. Also on the slide, you've got all my contact information, but I think all of you know how to find me. So, all right, I filled 20 minutes. Is there anything on anyone's minds or any questions that I can answer before we get to road mapping later this morning?
I could perhaps say a couple of words about the developers calls.
Please.
I've been thinking about it, and well, I can only speak for myself, but since I'm pretty involved in stuff, I usually am fairly well on the map regarding what's happening. So I feel that all the notifications I get via email or Slack or anything kind of work as a report on what's happening and what's cooking. So I don't think that for me that it really feels a purpose. So I feel that maybe if it's a lot of work for you, Damien, to write those summaries or list those things and arrange the meeting, it could be time better spent. And one thing that might actually reach a larger audience would be some kind of a progress report on at some intervals. I don't know what's good, a good one once a month or so, that what's in progress, what's to be expected, and what has been maybe a roadblock or so. And if there is something that would be useful to prepare for in next releases or things like that, like well, you've done that already, but maybe like more of like formalized newsletter style or something like that. I don't know, just a thought. I would like to hear other comments or how others feel about that.
No one else seems to be jumping to speak, so I will say I actually find it a useful exercise to review all of the Jira tickets and pull requests for the purposes of putting together the developers call agenda. So I certainly don't mind doing that, but I never feel that me reading that aloud to 3 other people is a good use of anyone's time. It's somewhat awkward. So I do like the idea that maybe a newsletter would be a better format for doing that same work, but making it more useful, and then people can read it or ignore it as they see fit. And then maybe reducing the frequency of the developer's call, but focusing it on specific areas where there are questions or concerns. I wonder if it would even be useful, just say hypothetically, if we went to a monthly schedule, I sent out sort of a summary newsletter a week before the call date, highlighting things that might be worth discussing on the call. And then we had the call on the assumption that everyone had read the newsletter. That would focus us right on useful conversation and make the call even shorter if there isn't really a need to talk about anything. And it also makes room if we decide that there are more structured things to do with the call, like do a tutorial of some sort that we can record for future use, etc.
That sounds good to me, at least. Having it in monthly basis would probably make it less of a burden for everyone, and also maybe, I don't know, should it be called something else than developers call? Because it can sound like something really scary. While
Right.
it would be great to have people coming in, even if they're not developers. Like you said, tutorials on stuff that are interesting to users in general. So some kind of a user's call or something that maybe not always, at least, goes so deep into development subjects, or it could be just one part of it. Yeah, community call. Sounds nice.
Yes, I was actually about to suggest community call. So whoever just posted that in the chat, thumbs up. I'm part of the Universal Viewer community, and they have a community call. It's a good name. Is anybody capturing notes on all this, by the way? Is Chris?
Yeah, I'm scratching this.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Chris. And I don't know if you want to say anything about what you had in mind recording-wise. I'm addressing Chris, who's in front of me right now. Would you like to actually walk up here so that we don't create a crazy feedback loop if you turn on your mic?
Will it cause a feedback?
All right, I turn over the floor to Chris.
One of the ideas I look forward to, I think the tutorials would be a good idea to use the recording of the call, but I know that we have a few conversations that are going to start today that might be good as like a test bed on how to handle future community or developer calls. In particular, conversations about what the next theme looks like, be it, we've been talking more framework agnostic over here, but it's very clear that there's a call for a more bootstrap and framework and supported theme. So that kind of discussion might be a good thing to try out a couple ideas with, of doing some vocabulary, some basic vocabulary definitions of what a pure bootstrap theme means, or actually walking through a road mapping of some ideas, or actually do some even some live developments, just to see if we can get some prototypes together that satisfy all of our needs. I think there's a good opportunity here for experimentation and community building with at least this topic. So I'd be happy to try a couple out of the box things later today or on the next call or anything like that. I think it's a good opportunity. So, and yeah, and weeks that we send out the 1 week review and then there's no topic, filling that with a tutorial or something that's more scripted and take the opportunity to record it and then edit that later for like the website is a technique that I've seen, in particular the P5JS community do very successfully. So I would look forward to seeing, I think that might be another good way to use the time and the connection that we already have. So that's my piece.
Yeah, and it's something eerie about the way I slide on and off the screen. But anyway, I think the advantage to using this as a live tutorial session as opposed to just creating recordings and sharing them is it does allow some interaction and question answering and so forth, which might improve the quality of the content.
And all this doesn't mean that we couldn't have a development specific topic or discussion. We could just place it in the end, or so that if there are more general topics, those could be discussed first, and before we reach the deep end.
Absolutely, yes. And I also should note that one of the greatest causes of strife for me for the past almost 10 years is the fact that we opted not to put an apostrophe in developers anywhere, and it always feels wrong when I type that name. So changing it to community removes so much internal conflict from my life. So thank you for that suggestion.
You are so right about that.
So is there anyone else with pressing issues to bring up prior to the roadmap session, or have we reached a lull and I need to figure out a dance or something to fill the time? I hope that's not the case. I can't do that.
Before anyone else gets a chance to say anything, I'll just add that I really miss being there in person, because I don't know if there is a technically viable way of reproducing coffee breaks in online participation, because I think that the coffee breaks and discussions have had during the breaks are often the most important things in a conference. And while this works technically quite well, and the audio is good and video sync is good, I still miss being there.
Absolutely, and I think this is really another argument toward moving to the OLF and taking advantage of Wolfcon, not only because I think it will make in-person attendance more convenient, at least some of the time, for more of the community, but also because it increases the potential for those types of interactions, because then your coffee breaks will include not just VuFind developers, but also people working on other projects. And sometimes having that conversation about a problem you're having that isn't in your own project, you know, with someone who's not in your own projects, that can spark some things too. And it's been increasingly a challenge to get people out here to Villanova. We really like it here, but it's not the most convenient location for everyone. So, you know, this year, full disclosure, we have one person who is not a Villanova employee in this room. Thank you for coming. Thank you again. But we need to do better to keep this going.
Besides, it's time for you guys to get to travel too.
That's true. That's true. I just need to get a passport, but I've got a couple of years. So if no one else has other pressing items on their minds, I'm wondering if it's worth a little bit of brainstorm doodling about, you know, sort of in order for topics to do tutorials on, if we're going to start using the community call for this purpose. I feel like having a useful outline might help everything else fall into place. Like what do we talk about first and how do we build up? You know, do we need an installation kind of thing where we do a live install and show how that works, or is that too basic? I think having a video about how the local directory works and, you know, precedence of configurations might be really valuable. But again, is that too basic? You know, sort of the obvious breakdown of ideas is first you have to install it, then you have to know how to configure it, then you probably need to know how to work with the themes, and then finally you need to know how to extend the code. So those are kind of the basic fundamentals you need to understand to do anything you want with VuFind. And then of course there are all kinds of things you can take deeper dives into after that. But if we're thinking about, you know, sort of half-hour videos containing a simple idea that somebody can take away and benefit from, those might be places to start.
Okay, I'll chime in again. I think none of those are too basic. I mean, one of the audiences could be like would-be users, somebody that has no experience in VuFind at all, and going to the web page and trying to follow instructions and everything might seem daunting for someone who's coming from the outside and doesn't really know what the software does, how it works, how it's built, and what kinds of things you need to configure to make it work. So a basic installation video would probably answer a lot of questions already for someone that's considering trying it out. So I would go with the easiest things first and follow on those with some maybe more advanced topics. But I wouldn't underestimate the importance of basic here we start and this how to get things going videos.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. And that also brings up the question of whether we also should have kind of a sales pitch, 10 minutes of what is VuFind and why would you want to use it. You know, that's a presentation I give fairly frequently, but I don't know that we have a good recorded version of that that conveys that concisely. So that if someone is considering the software, they can get a quick yes or no, this actually applies to my problem kind of answer.
Definitely yes. Especially because even if someone asks you, it's really difficult to remember all the important things to say.
Right. And of course, if we then move into installation, there's the question of, you know, which approach do we take to this? Do we show using the Debian package on Ubuntu because you can do that in 5 minutes? Do we use Vagrant because you can get consistent results across platforms, even though you would never deploy it that way? I'm not sure what the best answer is. But again, probably something that's easier would be a good place to start if somebody's coming in thinking, how can I do this as efficiently as possible?
I think maybe both, because different audiences use different techniques, and someone's really into Debian, but someone is using Windows and has no intention of installing Linux at any point in the nearby future, just to test things out. So I think a basic how to get started even if it's not ready for production, would be useful, so that you could try things out and see how the stuff works.
Sounds good. This also leads me to wonder if one approach to this would be to produce short videos, play them into the community call, solicit feedback, and then adjust them accordingly, or whether actually recording it live on the call makes sense. And the answer to that may differ based on the topic. But some of these things, if we're aiming to have them really efficient and punchy, probably pre-recording them is going to be more effective than doing it live. But if it's more technical and more in-depth, then having it in a more conversational format might actually be better. And of course, we can also edit things after the fact to some extent.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. You're a
Great.
little slow.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Well, I was just trying to join to your discussion, but unfortunately my microphone didn't work. But now it does. So my idea would be also to maybe just outline the installation procedure, but also to give. I mean, you also mentioned it to give a broader overview what VuFind actually does, because I think it's sometimes kind of hard to describe that you actually need an index and you need metadata processing and all that stuff. And I think if somebody is thinking about using VuFind for a library's needs, it's important to point out all the different aspects that you have to think about, and then also to grasp them in a conceptual way, not necessarily in a very detailed way regarding installation and so on, but to get an impression of what are the prerequisites for all that stuff. And then maybe this could create a structure the following videos could build up on. Yeah, so we have like the search backend, we have the ILS system and all that stuff. And I think maybe this will structure the idea of tutorials and how people can think about and also speak about. I mean, sometimes even difficult to get all the names and the taxonomy we are using. So maybe this could be a structure that could be helpful for other people joining in new to VuFind.
Definitely, and of course, the fact that you bring up indexing metadata is really important. That's another topic that could use some coverage. You know, basics of working with Mark, basics of working with XML, etc.
Yeah, I think, well, yeah, maybe the same problem appears with the local library system, and maybe even then with all the themes and all that stuff too. So I think there would be lots of topics we could grasp on, but I think the most important part would be to somehow get a grasp on what the potential auditorium would actually like to see and what they actually need. So and that's what I still have some some difficulties with, that it's hard for us to see what actually the need is, right? So maybe the engagement of VuFind in the wider open source community is a good way of. All right. Is that me? Okay, now it's okay. Maybe the engagement is a good way to get contact and to also to learn maybe from the other communities. I don't know if you have had any exchange with the communities so far, but how to recruit new community members or something like that?
Not a whole lot. A couple of years ago, Chris and I attended a conference that was about open source sustainability, and we spoke with representatives from a whole lot of different projects that were at all different points in the life cycle. And that was a very interesting experience, but I don't know that we came away from it with a lot of tangible solutions so much as an increased awareness of all the problems and pitfalls. But yes, I definitely think the OLF membership ties in closely with this work, because this will hopefully get more fresh eyes on the project, and having some welcoming material to help people orient themselves would be very valuable when that happens. And we also will hopefully be able to solicit more feedback on whatever we come up with at the same time. The other obvious challenge with this kind of content is that it's somewhat expensive in terms of time and effort to produce. So we would want to try to focus on things that won't age away too quickly. So keeping things high level and conceptual is probably the best place to start, at least, so that we can get some kind of evergreen material that will remain relevant for a long time. And you know, we may eventually get to the point where we do want to do some deep dives into things that may change sooner. But I would want to start by building an infrastructure of content that will be useful for a long time. Someone is having some audio problems.
I think he's trying to say something.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I'm sorry. Can't seem to hear you. And there are two of you for some reason.
Was passiert ist, eure anderen.
Yeah, sadly, that's still not coming through. It sounded a little bit more like speech than just interference, but it wasn't quite audible yet. Okay. And I also saw, I was looking at the public chat, and there was a comment about SolarMark configuration. And I agree that having some better information on that one way or another would be really useful, because every time I run into a problem with SolarMark, I reach out to the SolarMark community and discover through Bob that there is a wonderful solution to my problem that I didn't know about. And I think getting all of that better documented would be valuable for everyone. But I think the problem there is, as is often the case, the project is mostly the work of one very busy person. And so documentation is a last line of concern. But maybe some of us can put some effort into resolving that. I know I've at least made a few minor updates to the SolarMark documentation in recent months to reflect new things I had learned about. And I guess another question I'll put out there as far as training opportunities go, is that something that might make sense? Like, can anyone think of conferences where that sort of a workshop might be of interest? I know a few years ago, Chris and I put in a proposal to the Code for Lib conference to do a pre-conference on VuFind, and there was a little bit of interest in that, but not enough for our proposal to get accepted. I don't know if it's worth revisiting that, but I'm thinking it would be nice to have kind of a curriculum for an introduction to VuFind course that could be repeatably taught if there were in fact a demand for said course. And I know that Mohan at HealthNet Nepal does periodically do workshops involving VuFind content, and I've provided some assistance to him with that. So I know he's interested in such a thing, but it would be nice to be able to pool resources there and have a sort of consistent experience we could offer when opportunities arise to do teaching about VuFind. And again, maybe these things are closely related, and if we develop videos, those become the curriculum of a training session.
Well, I don't know if you know the library carpentry workshops, and those are, I mean, from the topics, they are more centered about metadata processing and also how to use your command line and all that stuff. But I think because VuFind more or less somehow represents the final goal of something like metadata processing, right, and command line operations and all that stuff, it might be an idea to reach out to these guys and maybe even to try to establish a workshop around VuFind and making this like a good opportunity to show how all the different pieces of working with metadata and also using command lines and also using web services and all that stuff to build something for a library. So I don't know if this might be useful. And on the other hand, we did some hands-on lab I think 2 or 3 years ago in Germany on how to create your own index, article index. So we are using some VuFind stuff too, or at least the front end. And so this might be interesting as well for conferences which are very library-based. I see Ira just posted the ELAC, for instance, which might be probably the conferences with the right auditorium. And I think in one day one can show, at least in the raw concepts, how you can set up such an instance of VuFind and do the metadata processing and so on.
That makes a lot of sense. I think that is worth following up on. And I mean, even in a sort of non-traditional sense, VuFind could fit into the toolkit of the library carpentry idea. Like, there are so many problems that I have solved by querying my Solar index. Like, even outside of publishing VuFind as a website, having the ability to install an instance of VuFind, index MARC records into it, possibly with some custom indexing rules, and then query that Solar instance can be really valuable. So that might be a sort of just a tiny corner of VuFind that could be shown in isolation, but would have a lot of utility.
It's true. I was also thinking about something that like we are doing with the record manager. If we encounter any errors, we log those in the index or index them in the different fields, sort of like the mark errors field, but the more like a, well, format agnostic way, but something like if there's an invalid date or anything like that in the record. So it could be seen as a toolbox for index or database cleanup or kind of metadata management tool.
Definitely. And I should also just say, as an aside, we're definitely hoping to use the record manager for some of our own workflows, but we just discovered that it requires PHP 7.2, and we're in the process of upgrading to 7.1. So,
Oh, well, we could maybe work something out. I don't remember exactly why I raised the requirement, but there was some reason for that. But it might have been some of the dependencies.
I think that is the case. And I think we can get our PHP updated, so it'll be all right. But yeah, we were hoping it would be really quick, and then a new wrinkle arose.
Yeah, it's always like that. But you can always find consolidation in that PHP 2.2, 7.2 or 7.3 are faster.
Right. And I think it's very likely we're going to be having the conversation about raising VuFind's requirement to 7.2 sooner rather than later, because I suspect 7.1's end of life is nearly upon us. In fact, that may even be a topic for road mapping in a few minutes.
But yeah, like Andre and I mentioned, ELAG in Europe might be a good platform for discussion or having a workshop or just a presentation about VuFind and the capabilities it provides. I think that's because it's kind of a conference with long history, being a platform agnostic or a vendor agnostic place to discuss various topics. I don't know what's the upcoming meetings topic, so can't say anything about that, and I have actually no idea where it's being held next because the website is lagging. But if it's something that even remotely suits the topic or the general idea of what the conference will be, it's a very useful place because it reaches a wide audience of different people in different institutions.
Yeah, that's great, and certainly I'd love to hear more once their website is behaving itself again. I'm thinking that if we make this a priority, we may be able to build up at least a basic library of content in, say, the first 6 months of next year. And once we have something to share, it may be time to start working on some outreach again. But I kind of think it might be worth prioritizing improving our documentation and communication first, and then trying to increase our visibility so that when people come to look at us, they're suitably impressed.
One idea, I mean, it's slightly off topic, but as we are talking about the documentation, we were thinking about some weeks ago if it wouldn't be if it would be worth a thought to not using Wiki, but rather going on with something like those static GitHub pages, because in some projects that I have been involved with, it was quite more like more familiar to work with Markdown and with the whole commit and pull and all that stuff workflow, rather than going to Wiki and then documenting the documentation isolated from all the code. Because if you are including the documentation within the code, it's more, you can more integrate it more with each other. So I don't know if that would be at all feasible, because it probably would be a very, very a lot of work to do, but then in the end it might be a good idea to or it might be worth the work to use a different technique than for the documentation, if we are planning now to restructure documentation and maybe to make it more attractive for other developers or users.
That's certainly a topic we've discussed before, and as you say, the main sticking point is the amount of labor involved in converting everything. The DocuWiki that we're using has a very hierarchical structure, which we're taking advantage of fairly extensively. And so it doesn't translate especially well to the way GitHub operates, at least the last time we looked at this. So on the one hand, it would be nice to not have to maintain the wiki software anymore. And as you say, there are benefits to using a more familiar platform and having the docs ship with the code. But it's a pretty big lift to get there. So unless we find a volunteer willing to do all that work, I just don't realistically see it happening, at least in the short term. especially because I'm really a stickler about links continuing to work. So I feel like if we switched platforms, I would feel obligated to come up with some mechanism that would redirect the existing wiki links over to GitHub, and that's even more work. But maybe I could be talked down from that ledge. In any case, it's a big job.
Yeah, totally. I just wanted to speak out the idea, to have a thought about it. And I mean, having to provide a link continuity and all that stuff, I mean, that would be quite big task. But yeah, anyway, maybe it's not the biggest problem we have right now, right?
Right. Well, and I mean, it's sort of in the same category as considering whether to leave Jira and use GitHub issues instead, where again, there are quite a few benefits. And after the last experience I had trying to upgrade Jira, I'm really not very happy with Jira, though I understand what went wrong now. But anyway, there's a lot of labor involved in maintaining Jira, but there's also a huge amount of legacy in there and some functionality that's richer than what GitHub Issues has to offer. But in the grand scheme of things, based on the way Jira is currently being used, I don't know that we get a whole lot of benefit beyond what Issues would offer us, but it's just a big boulder to move to make the change. But we'll see, maybe we'll have such a great time road mapping with Jira today that we will decide that we would never want to leave that lovely environment. And of course, there's also the philosophical question of how much of our workflow do we want to trust to GitHub. Though GitHub's been great. I have no active problems with GitHub. But maybe there are benefits to having local control over stuff too. Just brainstorming. And with that, we are about 2 minutes away from our break time. Thank you everyone for helping me fill this time with interesting conversation. And then I think we'll just take a 15-minute break and then be back to roadmap.
Can I jump in?
Oh yes, and Chris wants to come up and say something.
I want to elaborate a bit on the road mapping, how it's going to work this year. So while we're on break, it might be good to go to the Google Doc linked on the screen right now and follow it to the Jira ticket. So there's a label this year, Roadmap 2019 for Jira tickets. So if you want to have a discussion when we come back to actually roadmap, one of the things that we'll be using to kind of guide that discussion are the tickets in that under that label. So go and add anything that I may have missed. I've been trying to keep up as things have been discussed. And also more importantly, vote on which tickets you think require the most discussion or you'd most like to hear us talk about and work through while we have this time at the conference. So those are good things to do while we take our 15-minute break. And when we come back, we'll figure out the best way to discuss all of the important issues. That's it.
Thank you, Chris, and everyone. I will switch over to a "we're on break" slide, but I will make sure that the link to the document is visible on that slide. All right. So I will see you in a few minutes.